Hey everyone, this is James from TDB, bringing you another Inbetweenisode. Today I am going to talk a bit about learning about tea and getting in shape for it is kind of the central core thesis that I'm going to be following for this episode. And I think, like anything, tea is something that you can be in practice for, in shape for, or you can also get out of shape for it. And I've been drinking tea fairly seriously since basically 2012, so essentially 13 years here. And there's been different points where I'm in shape and I feel like my palate is working well and I can tell the difference between certain teas. And there's certain times where it's not working well. There's even, to be more specific, times where I feel like I am in the zone and I can taste a certain type of tea, for instance, aged oolongs. And there are times where I'm like, well, I'm not totally sure because I have not had an aged oolong in a while, and so I'm kind of out of practice with this type of tea, so it's a lot harder to judge. And so I think a lot of this is simply getting repetitions in within kind of like a certain time frame. I think is also kind of a way to do it. And if you think about how we learn, I think one way, for instance, how I learn is through concentrating learning. And so this is something where kind of the tea of the months that I used to do ages ago, where I would basically try a bunch of different teas that are themed a certain way and are theoretically similar to each other in a relatively close proximity. We're not talking about like side by side, but rather drinking at least one of these types of teas once per day or every other day or maybe twice a day, but in relative close proximity to each other. And that way it really allows you to see what sets teas apart, and it helps to really kind of develop that knowledge. And of course, some of that is going to be more temporary and transient. So it's like if I didn't drink that type of tea for like 3 years or something and came back to it, you're going to be a little bit rusty for obvious reasons. But like muscles, I like to think it's something that comes back a little bit easier the second time or the third time you come back to it. So for instance, if you were to drink a bunch of teas in close proximity, you can start to pick at what makes it stand out. So for instance, when I had the nameless one ripe from White Tea, which is one of their fancy boutique ripes in a vacuum, I was like, whoa, this is really good, and it stood out. But then I spent a week drinking a bunch of fancy ripes, and it started to seem a little more ordinary, and I think I had a more accurate idea of how to place it. Of course, it was still a nice ripe, but for instance, I found it a bit worse than something like the Lich tiers that White Tea sells, and I think there's a real kind of quality difference in between those two teas. Aged oolong is another example I brought up a couple times already, but that's a good example for myself because I have gone through varying phases of drinking quite a lot of aged oolongs. There's a couple trips in Taiwan where I focused a lot more on aged oolongs than I did pu'er, for instance. And so I felt like in a certain time period, I was kind of dialed in. I could tell what was good or not. And then I would occasionally not drink it because it wouldn't always pass my speed test back home. And so you could present an aged oolong to me that I might inaccurately say was better than it was, or inaccurately say it was worse than it was because I wasn't used to it. Part of that could also be brewing. You get better at brewing certain things or noticing different ways that a tea interacts if you do it more frequently. So a lot of this is very, very common sense. It's concentrated learning in terms of just how the tea brews, as well as kind of in your taste memories in your palate. So yeah, you can definitely get in shape and out of shape. So let me know if this resonates. I think a lot of it is, very, very common sense and certainly applies to a lot of different things. I will say that part of this reflection is because in the last 4 or 5 years, up until maybe a year or so ago, that I have been a little bit kind of sleepwalking in certain respects for tea. I just haven't quite poured myself into it as much as I did in my earlier years. And I have kind of, to some extent, going to Taiwan in 2024 sort of reinvigorated that passion and that desire to learn. And so there's going to just be different seasons of life where maybe you're drinking tea a little bit more seriously, you're eager to learn more, and there are other seasons where you're a little bit less eager. So one of those teas that, I sampled and tried back then was this 1999 Iron Cake that I split with a couple people. Shout out to Mr. Green. And back then I was like, I was drinking kind of boutique, just really doing one tea a day or so, drinking a little ripe boutique. I was like, it's still pretty dry and pretty rough. So in one respect, I think I was correct. I think the tea is still a bit too dry. But I went back to this tea somewhat recently, and it's a good tea. Like, this is a 1999 Shagwan Iron Cake. It should be good. And it stood out. It's strong, it's dense, it has a lot of things that we look for. Of course, it's still a little bit too dry, and something tells me it's not because it's significantly aged in this little tiny baggie, or because I've been storing it super optimally or anything like that. So, so that's just another example of kind of someone that is maybe not totally in the zone or a little bit out of shape trying something, and then coming back and trying a lot of different factory tea, a lot of different Shagwan tea, but just a lot of tea in general. And also focusing on it more, thinking about it more, and perhaps reevaluating what you think of a tea. I mean, it's the same tea as it probably was 2 or 3 years ago when we split this cake up, but I like it much, much more now. So thank you all for tuning in. Let me know what you think of this episode, and I will see you all next time. Cheers.